1748. A ship drifted from the ice, her crew frozen in silence. On a bleak October afternoon in 1775, a whaling ship named Herald sighted a strange silhouette off the coast of Greenland. At first, it seemed like any other vessel struggling through Arctic waters. Sails tattered, masts stiff with frost, hull grinding against broken floes. But as the Herald drew nearer, the silence became uncanny. No signal, no crew on deck, only the creak of timber and the groan of ice shifting beneath the keel. Boarding parties rowed across, their oars cutting through water as black as iron. When they clambered onto the deck, boots crunching through frost, they saw a ship locked in time. The name painted across the stern read Octavius. No logbooks had reached Europe in years. Whispers had said she was lost on a daring voyage west. Now she returned not with triumph, but with something colder than defeat. Cabins were found sealed in frost. Sailors sat at their posts as if awaiting orders, but their faces were ashen, masks of ice. A logbook, brittle with cold, lay open on the captain's desk, its ink blurred yet legible enough to hint at madness. Northwest Passage, attained, and then a scrawl that trailed off into nothing. What haunted the boarding crew was not only death, but order. Pipes rested near lips frozen mid-draw. A candle stub clung to its holder, flame long gone but wick preserved. The captain himself was discovered in his cabin, head bowed as if in sleep, quill in hand, log unfinished. It was as if life had halted not in chaos, but in a single instant of dreadful stillness. The Herald's sailors fled quickly, leaving the Octavius to her drifting tomb. Behind them, the ice closed like a gate, and the frozen ship faded back into the white silence from which it had come. Inside the Octavius, the boarding party moved cautiously, lanterns swinging and shadows crawling across frost-slick planks. Every corridor was a corridor of silence. Doors were stiff with ice, hinges shrieking as if reluctant to reveal what lay behind. In the crew's quarters, they found hammocks still occupied, bodies rigid, faces glazed in crystalline masks. Some lay with hands folded across their chests, others caught mid-gesture as though sleep had been overtaken by eternity. The galley was no warmer. Pewter bowls remained half-filled with dried husks of food, spoons frozen upright like relics in amber. A pot of what had once been stew clung to its iron rim, hard as stone, while a rat, equally stiff, crouched nearby, locked forever in its final pursuit. Each discovery deepened the strangeness. Not panic, not struggle, but a tableau, as if an unseen hand had ordered time to halt. On deck, frost clung to rigging like brittle vines. One sailor, still gripping a rope, stood braced against the wind, his eyes clouded in glassy white. The boarding crew whispered prayers under their breath, though even their words seemed swallowed by the Arctic air. Fear grew not from decay, but from preservation, the uncanny sense that these men had not died so much as been suspended, witnesses to some frozen covenant between man and sea. The silence pressed heavier with every step. The crew of the Herald, hardened whalers who had seen storms and drownings, felt unease coil tight in their stomachs. To them, this was no ordinary wreck. It was a vessel that had not perished, but lingered, caught between voyage and grave. And still, somewhere deep within, the captain's log waited, frozen ink on frozen pages, promising an answer they dreaded to read. The captain's cabin was the heart of the silence. Frost veiled the windows, muting the light into a dim blue haze. The desk was still arranged as if its owner had only stepped away. Quills scattered, an inkpot sealed by ice. Charts rolled, but ready for command. Yet behind the desk sat the figure of the master himself, bowed slightly, quill frozen in hand. His coat, once proud navy wool, was rimmed with white crust. His beard carried beads of ice. Before him lay the ship's log, pages brittle and fused by cold. The boarding sailors leaned close, hesitant to touch what seemed both sacred and cursed. The last entry, half smudged but legible, bore a date, 1762, 14 years after the ship had departed London. The words were stark. "We have passed the northern coast of Alaska. The Northwest Passage is ours." The sentence faltered, ink dragging into a frozen blot. No further line followed. The ship had been found adrift in 1775. That meant the Octavius had wandered unmanned through ice and storm for more than a decade. The realization tightened their throats. If true, this vessel had circumnavigated the world, sailed from London, through the Arctic, and back toward the Atlantic, all without the touch of living hands. The ghostly voyage was a triumph in geography, but a requiem in human cost. A sudden crack of ice outside made the lantern jump, shadows flaring across the captain's still form. One sailor whispered a prayer but let it die on his lips. The cabin smelled faintly of old oak and brine, but beneath it lingered something colder, the absence of time itself. They closed the log gently, leaving the quill where it rested, as if the dead captain still had work unfinished. The words in the logbook chilled the boarding sailors more than the frostbitten air. 14 years had passed since the Octavius had left London, her course ambitious, westward through the fabled Northwest Passage, a dream of merchants and monarchs alike. If the captain's last entry was true, she had achieved the impossible, yet at a price so high, it erased all triumph. The ship had become a drifting tomb, completing her voyage without her crew. To imagine her wandering those years through ice and storm was to imagine a ghost at sea. She must have been locked in Arctic pack ice for seasons, thawing only to drift again, pushed by currents indifferent to the dead who filled her decks. Sails shredded, masts bent but unbroken, she crossed oceans as if steered by unseen hands. Whalers may have glimpsed her silhouette and dismissed it as a mirage. Fishermen may have whispered of a phantom brig appearing on fog horizons, only to vanish with the wind. The Herald's crew now stood inside that rumor made real. Every nail and spar around them carried the weight of years adrift, every rope stiff as bone. To touch her timbers was to touch time itself, stretched too far, preserved in ice. They understood then that this was not simply a wreck, but a vessel that had survived longer than its masters, voyaging on without command. The sailors of the Herald debated whether to tow her, claim salvage, or burn her where she drifted. But fear, deeper than greed, grew in their throats. A ship that sailed 14 years without living crew was no prize. It was an omen. The Arctic had carried her back only to remind men of their smallness. The crew of the Herald had faced storms, drowning in the cruelty of whales thrashing against harpoons. but nothing unsettled them like the silence of the Octavius. Here was not chaos, but a calm so absolute it suggested the hand of something greater than storm or hunger. Men crossed themselves, muttered prayers in half-whispers, or refused to enter deeper into the vessel. The bravest who did return from the captain's cabin carried eyes that would not meet their fellows. The fear was not of death itself. They had seen plenty of that, but of a death preserved, untouched, and multiplied by time. Bodies that did not rot, gestures caught mid-motion, a voyage finished without the living. These things did not belong to the natural world. To touch the railing, rhymed with ice and salt, was to feel a pulse of unease run up the arm. On deck, one sailor swore he heard footsteps pacing above, though no boards moved. Another claimed he saw frost on the rigging fall as if brushed by an unseen hand. The lantern light seemed too small, devoured by shadows that clung between beams. Men grew restless, and fear shifted into something sharper. Superstition, the kind that makes knives twitch in their sheaths and compels men to leave while they still can. The Herald's captain, sensing the rising dread, gave the order to retreat. No charts, no salvage, no prize could outweigh the weight pressing on his men's souls. They rowed back quickly, oars splashing in rhythm, leaving the Octavius adrift once more. Behind them, the derelict ship loomed against the fog, her frozen crew still staring into eternity, her captain still bent over his final words. The ice closed in as if eager to reclaim its wandering secret. When the Herald sailors returned to port, they spoke of what they had seen only in fragments, never the whole tale, for fear it might cling to them like frost. Yet fragments were enough. Stories passed from tavern to tavern, each retelling adding a shadow or a shiver. The Octavius became more than a derelict ship. She became a warning, a floating ghost whose voyage had defied both reason and mercy. Seamen whispered that she had been cursed the moment her captain chose the Northwest Passage, a route nature itself guarded with cruelty. Merchants claimed the ice had preserved her crew as if to mock ambition. Some insisted the Octavius had never been built by men at all, but had risen from the sea, a phantom vessel wearing a mortal disguise. And always the details returned, the frozen captain with his unfinished log, the sailors locked in gestures of life, the 14 years adrift. By candlelight in coastal inns, the tale grew into prophecy. If a ship's lookout spied a sail on the horizon that vanished with the mist, it must be the Octavius. If a vessel returned empty after storm, sailors whispered its crew had been taken to serve the frozen ship. Even merchants and nobles, men of accounts and contracts, lowered their voices when her name surfaced, as though the Arctic itself might overhear. The legend spread beyond Greenland and Britain, across the Atlantic, carried by the same winds that had borne the ship in her wandering. Each retelling ensured that the Octavius sailed further in story than she ever had in life. She was no longer only wood and sail, but an omen that outlived the ice. The Octavius was never seen again. Some claimed she sank beneath the Greenland ice, her timbers crushed by shifting floes. Others swore she still drifted, condemned to wander until the sea itself forgot her name. Without proof, The ship passed from record into legend, yet her story endured, etched not in logs or charts, but in the uneasy silence of sailors' voices whenever her name was spoken. In the centuries since, historians searched for evidence, registries, manifests, insurance claims, but the trail dissolves into rumor. No official record proves her existence beyond the tale told by the Herald's crew. Yet absence only sharpened her outline. Like all great mysteries, the less that is known, the more imagination supplies. The Octavius became an emblem of Arctic fear, the reminder that seas can take, preserve, and return what they please. The vision lingers. Frozen men locked in gestures of duty, a captain bent over an unfinished sentence, and a ship that sailed farther without life than most with it. To stand on an icy shore today, listening to the groan of shifting flows, is to hear her timbers echoing across time. Travelers who pass Greenland's coast still tell of shapes on the horizon that dissolve into mist, of ghostly masts rimed with frost, sails stiff as shrouds. Perhaps she lies beneath the waves, her story buried in silt and silence. Or perhaps she continues her eternal voyage, a spectre adrift, reminding all who sail that ambition can end in stillness and discovery in death. The Octavius remains icebound not only in legend, but in memory. Her last log a question left open, her crew forever frozen at sea.